One of my most memorable times while I was stationed in Kuwait doing Desert Storm and Desert Shield was when we came up from the south out of Saudi Arabia on the 4-lane highway coming into Kuwait City. And along that route, we, kind of drove around or we dodged bomb holes that our aircraft had actually left there. On the left and right side of this 4-way interstate, coming out of Kuwait, coming out of Saudi Arabia into Kuwait, we could still see the smothering tanks that had been hit in place. It was safe to do that travel then based on our commands. It was safe, and the enemy was way north of us and they was headed back toward Iraq. So we took this trip, and my whole platoon went, and we rotated 3 or 4 days until I could get all 32 of my people up to see what we, in fact, assisted in doing. We were communications people, and we ensured that phones and data and everything else was working. But the combat arms and the airmen and the aviation actually took the fight to the enemy. And we saw evidence of it on that trip. What's most memorable about that trip, when we entered the city limits of Doha, which is a suburb of Kuwait City, and not quite into Kuwait City, we could actually see the oil wells burning, billowing black smoke. And as we got closer to the city limits of Kuwait City, that raw oil, unburnt oil that was coming, it came out of the sky, hitting us in the windshield. That was one of the most strangest sights I ever seen, because it was like oil coming out of the sky. But we know that when the Iraqis cut and they ran back home or north, they intended to, destroy the infrastructure as much as they possibly could. So the oil fields were on fire. The Marines were up there guarding and taking care of it. And through newsreel, we learned that engineers from the U.S. and Europe were dispatched to help contain those wells and tap those wells so they could quit burning. And as we continued our trip around Kuwait City, coming up Gulf Road, moving north, moving south, moving from the south to the north of the city, and we saw the Sheraton Hotel that we had seen many times on TV, where the diplomats stayed or where news people stayed and visitors stayed when they visited, Kuwait City. And as we passed by it, we could see that the side of the Sheraton Hotel was burned. It was basically destroyed on one side, and so no one was inhabited there. The other site that we saw as we drove around the Gulf Road, that all the apartments that were facing the Gulf, the water itself, had sandbags. They were bunkers. They were made to be bunkers. So there was guns or there were sandbags in the windows, because the enemy thought that we would come up the Gulf to take the city by water. And so therefore they had hunkered down inside of the apartments that were facing the Gulf. And we continued our trip all the way around to the tall spike, the 3 spikes that you see in Kuwait City on photos and pictures now, the balls, they call them the big 3 balls. We went to that far, and across the street from the towers was the American Embassy. So when we saw the American Embassy, we turned around, made a U-turn, and we started our trip back. And when we started our trip back, we pulled over on the beach area of the Gulf, and some of my soldiers got out and they began to explore to see what was going on the beach. And on that beach, the engineers had went through and cleaned that area. The landmines were there, in other words. And there was like hundreds of landmines in this pile, and a little further down in another pile, and another pile, all the way down the length of that beach area and that recreational area out of Kuwait City. And as we came back and we exited the city limits of Kuwait City, and we was going to leave it behind us, that's when these large crowds of people, began to chirp and be happy and waving the flag and showing the picture of the president at the time, President Senior George Bush. They were just happy and they were elated that their enemy had been evicted. We had helped them do it, and they were showing their gratitude to us by being there for us and really, you know, standing maybe almost on a parade route. But that was one of my most memorable times.